All right. Hi, people. I'll be doing this one in the dark, and we have covered all the main stuff that you do need to know for your first projects. The things that we're going to be covering now is just sort of really cool features and like useful stuff that you'll want to know, but you're not necessarily going to put them into your first projects. So today we're going to do some really cool stuff. Well, I think so, and stuff that hopefully you'll enjoy. And the first one is how to sort of extract motion from videos. So if you sort of want to know how you can sort of put in effects on top of video and sort of match that to the motion, that's what we'll do now. So let me pop into After Effects. And so here is one example where I'm making an effect to go along with my eyes. Or here's an effect where I've got text that is fitting into the world. Or here is another one where I am matching the motion of the phone to fit a window of a video in there. So it's not a perfect match in this case, but you can get the idea of the sort of stuff that you can do. So, and then later on we'll go into doing 3D effects with text and objects in After Effects. So I'm going to start with the simplest form of tracking, and that is, let me just turn this effect off. I didn't crop it to that layer. So what if you want to have an effect like this, where you have an object in the scene and you want to either put a box around it or make an effect that points to an object, or stick an image over a point in a video. So in this case, it's just a silly video of myself holding a pencil. And what I'm doing is a thing called tracking on the pencil, and then I've got this little effect using expressions that we did yesterday to point at that tracking point. So you can imagine you can do sort of cool, complicated effects where you have multiple objects in a scene and you have effects and expressions all tied up to points in the scene. So this is a simple one-point tracker. So all it is doing is tracking one point in the scene. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to create a new comp. I can't actually remember which video this was. Okay, so I'm just going to drag this video into a new comp, and I'll just create a comp with this video. So this is that same one with the pencil. Nothing special in here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just crop in a little section over here and say trim comp to work area. So that's just so we don't have to do the entire video, because that can be a bit slow. So we've just got these 6 seconds of video or so here. Okay, so if you want to do tracking, there is a window that you just need to open up because it might not be showing up by default. So under window, just make sure that you have the tracker over here. So tracker. And then that should pop up somewhere. In this case, it's at the bottom over here. I'm just going to scale this up so you can see it a little bit better. Hopefully you can. And you just need to select the layer that you want to extract motion from. You'll see that when you don't have a layer selected, it's all grayed out. When I select the layer, it gives you some options over here. So you'll see that there's a whole lot of options already. Track camera, track motion, warp stabilizer, stabilize motion. We'll go into all of that a little bit later. But we'll start off with the simple one with track motion. So if I click on track motion, the first option that comes up is just the single point tracker that we're going to work on here. You'll see it gives the source, which is the video that we're extracting the motion from. And under track type, you'll see a whole different set of options. And then there's position, rotation, scale. We're just going to do a position track for now. So all that it's going to do is get the position of a point in the scene as it moves across. So you see this little thing here saying track point. And if you click and drag, you get a little window that moves around zooming in, showing what it's looking at. So let's do it with the bottom of the pencil, because this is a very high contrast point in the scene. And this will then try and follow this point around as the video plays back. So I'm just in a random point of the video here. And what I can do is I can say analyze and then analyze forward. And what it will do is we'll try and follow that point as it moves around in the video. And then you'll see it automatically adds some keyframes in there. And that actually worked fine. And let me just find, so you see it's only done it for a little section of the video because I started it randomly in the middle. So if I just press U to open up all keyframes, I can go to where it has these keyframes and then do analyze backwards. So you can see it takes a little bit of a while to just do all this, and then actually you're seeing it's doing exactly what I thought it might. It's now, the point has no longer attached to the bottom of the pencil. So I'm just going to stop it there because it's basically failed at its track. So you see it's fine, and then suddenly the pencil sort of goes over the hand over here, and then the tracking fails over here. So if that happens when you're doing this, there are two different things you can do. So you can go to where the track starts to fail. So that's about here. I'm going to delete all the keyframes up to that point because they're all going to be messed up now. And then what you can do is just move frame by frame and manually just target it and see if it will analyze it frame by frame and keep the track. So you can do analyze one frame backwards. And if that keeps working, there you see it didn't track that point, so we just get that on the point, and now it should be able to analyze because it's now on the hand, and that's fine. And you'll see now it started failing again, and that's for another reason now, and that's because it's got motion blur in the video. So if you're trying to do a motion tracking shot, you really want to use a footage that's got the minimal amount of motion blur, because it's no longer a sharp edge there and it doesn't really know what's happening. So in this case, I'd have to delete those keyframes and sort of try manually put it in place until the motion blur goes away. So it's a little bit annoying. You really should set up your video for to avoid these issues. I just did a really quick example of it for you, so don't worry. So you would have to sort of then do it frame by frame until you can get to a point where it will identify. So I'm just doing the analyze one frame backwards. You can do this forwards. I'm just doing it backwards because that's just the randomly where I had the cursor on for the video. So it's still a lot quicker than it would be to do this frame by frame manually to move an object and animate keyframes. But it's just because I have poor footage over here that I have to do this. So really my tip to you is make your footage good in the first place so you don't have to fix it and do all this manual stuff, because it kind of defeats the point. So I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to do the entire set of stuff, but I just wanted to show you what to do if it does fail. The other thing that you can do is, you see we've got these two squares around the point. This is what it uses to analyze the video to do the tracking. So what is the outer one, the big one, is the search area. So if you make this big, what it's going to do is it's going to search a huge area for what's in the middle square. So it uses the middle square here as what it's looking for and the outer square for where it's looking. So if I just shrink this down, so this inner square over here, when I move the block around, that's the magnified area in here. So if I make that really small and move this around, you'll see it's just looking at that bit. If I make it really big, it's looking for that whole area. The thing is, you don't want this to be too big because then it will be a really slow tracking. So if I make this bigger, it might be more accurate because there's more to compare to, but you'll see that every single frame will now take way, way longer to calculate. So it's sort of a trade-off. You might get more accuracy. It's actually not always more accurate, but it can take a really, really long time to calculate every single frame. And you see it's still lost tracking there. So really the best thing is to have no motion blur in your footage, nice high contrast points. Like you might have seen movies, like behind the scenes stuff, they have like bright points on actors with like funny colors and textures on them. That's to get this sort of tracking information with high contrast points that they can identify. I'm just doing it with a bright colored pencil because that was what I had on hand. Okay, so once you've got a tracking point like this, and then you want to actually use it for something. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a null object to the scene. Null objects are always great for this sort of thing. So I've just got a null object in the scene. If I just switch back to the comp, it's just there in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is, with this layer selected and the tracker panel selected, what I just need to do is on the motion target over here, I say edit target, and I just select the null and say OK. And then apply this to the null object. So what it's going to do is it's going to set the null object's position to this tracker point. So once I do apply, it'll give me the option of choosing apply it to the X and Y position, or just the X or just the Y position of that object. I want to do it to both so it sits exactly on there. So now you'll see as I scrub through here, the null object's position is now keyframed to that tracker. So now we can use that to do anything. You know, you could just have this be an image and stick it onto a point if you want. It's just nice to have it on a null object because we can do other stuff with it. So like the effect that I did with that pointer earlier was using I had a solid layer on here and just made it comp size. Doesn't matter what color this is because I'm going to add an effect on here called beam. So beam effect, it basically just creates an effect between 2 points. So if I just put a point somewhere over here, if you remember yesterday we were doing expressions, and what we can do is we can set this expressions point, so the second one, the ending point, with the Alt button or the Option button on your keyboard, and click on the stopwatch. It'll turn on an expression over here, and we can pick whip that to the null objects. So pick whipping the position, and that sets the end point of the effect to the null object's transform position. So you see that pick whipping thing just types that all in for you, so you don't have to do it manually. And now that effect will go along to that point. You could actually also not use the null object and pick whip it straight from the motion trackers in the effect over here. But the nice thing is when you have it with a null object, you can sort of see it in the scene and do other stuff with it as well. So what we could do then also is we could have like a piece of text, and then we could parent that to the null object quickly and easily, and then that will move around the scene like that. So it's a lot easier than manually moving these things, and it's pretty easy for this single point track. And then how you can link that up to effects and do stuff. So that's using the beam effects. You can have that with different colors and stuff and do whatever you want. I'm just doing a simple example for you over here. So that's the 1 point track. So that's only going to 1 point with position. If we wanted to do something a little bit more advanced, so let me just create another comp over here. So I'm just going to create a new comp with the same video. Let's just do it with a little, I don't know, another section in the video, just so we've got a little, yeah, I had another bit where I was doing my fingers or something. So this might actually be a nice example, just a different object. So I'm just going to do the same thing and trim the comp to the work area. So that's just so we're working with this little section with, just do a short section over here. So there's a lot of motion blur in this, but it makes for a nice, what you can imagine is like a pointer with 2 points on here. So if you wanted to get like rotation and stuff from an object, you would need to use 2 points because you can't really get that from 1 point. So we're going to open up the tracker again, select the layer and say track motion. And if we want to do 2 points, we need to not just use position, but we can do rotation and scale as well. So let me just drag this first one. I'm going to scale up the search radius just so it's about the size of the fingertip and put that on the fingertip there. And let's put on rotation. And you'll see as soon as I add rotation, it adds a second point over here. So what we can do is we can use this somewhere else. So maybe like this contrasty point over here where the fingers intersect. It might not be perfect if the fingers move. I don't remember if my fingers bend in here, but you always want to look for a contrasty point. So bright and darks next to each other. So I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller so it doesn't take forever. And I think the fingertip might have to be that big. We'll see. So then if we do analyze, we can just play it forward and see if it keeps the tracking. Remember, there was a lot of motion blur and it loses that because it doesn't have the contrast anymore. So let's just stop that. Let's go to over here. I'm just going to do this really quickly and not make it too accurate. But of course, if you're wanting to make this look good, you would want to be as accurate as possible. I'm just doing a quick example video, so let's not worry too much. Just want to get past the motion blur area. But you can see if you do have a lot of motion blur, you'll just have to guess where the best spot would be to put this. And you would ideally really want to avoid video with strong motion blur like this because it makes your life difficult. You can always fake motion blur on your video later using effects that analyze the motion in the scene and will add motion blur, but you can't remove motion blur. A fairly tedious process if you've got this sort of stuff. I'm just going to put it on the contrasty point on the finger over here. But now it should be able to follow from here if it doesn't get stuck on the door frame there or something. Okay, there's not a lot of motion there with the finger. It's just sort of staying in one spot, but you can see how we've got that. It sort of tracks the sweep of the fingers, even if it's not great. But especially in the beginning section there, we've got that little bit where it's tracking there. This is a really poor example of this, but let's just use it for that. So I'm just going to add a new layer to the scene. Let's just do a solid this time. Let's make it a 500 by 100 pixel, well, let's do 50 pixel red solid. So if we go to the comp, we've just got this little solid object over here. I'm just switching back to the layer over here where we can say edit target, select the red solid. It is the only other layer in the scene, so it's automatically selected. But if you have lots of layers, you want to make sure that you've got the right layer selected there. And what this will do is it will apply the position and the rotation to that. So I can say apply, same choice of X and Y. And now we've got this tracked to follow the finger. Not perfect at the end there, but and there's a little bit there where there's a funny bit of tracking there. So we might want to just So because it applies these as keyframes over here, you can just edit them yourself if things are a little bit weird. So that's where it loses the tracking. So let's just trim this off over here. Let's actually just say trim comp. And then if you want to match the motion blur, you can turn on the motion blur for this layer. And then we can just tweak the settings. So if we go into the composition settings, under advanced, we can adjust the strength for the motion blur with the shutter angle. And you'll see it updates in the background there. And then this thing over here, shutter phase, lets you control where the motion blur happens. Is it before or after the current frame? So you see as I adjust that, the motion blur sort of moves ahead with the current frame, or you can have it be more behind the current frame. So adjusting this, you can get it to fit the camera's motion blur as best as your eye can make it. So now this might look a little bit better with sort of matching motion blur. If I just adjust that phase a little bit over here, depending on the footage you have and the camera it was recorded with, it'll be very different. But you can get something that looks semi-convincing. I mean, it's a red square on a actual video, so that won't be great. But you can imagine how you could use this to create, like lightsaber effects, or put magic effects, or bullet trails. I don't know, all sorts of things. Your imagination can go wild with this. And that's just a simple example of a 2-point track. So fingertip to end, start of finger. You can also make this a little bit more complicated and do a tracking with scale as well. So that was just position and rotation. You can also do the exact same thing, but turn on scale, and then it will scale the red square to fit between the 2 points. So if the finger moves backwards and forwards in space, the red square will get bigger and smaller. But it's the exact same stuff. You just check scale as well, and then we'll apply keyframes to the scale of your object. I'm not going to do that because there's not much point in doing that. It's exactly the same thing. And in this scene, you won't really see it because it just rotates like this. So if you know you're just going to do, it doesn't really change size, you don't have to turn on scale. You could if you want to be way more accurate, but it might make the solver take a little bit longer as well. Okay, so that is motion with 1 point and 2 points. What I'm going to show you now is where you have more points. So in this case, matching the video of the square of this sort of screen to put an image fitting with perspective on the scene. So in this case, it's just my phone aimed at the web camera. Let me just find the video over here. So I'm going to create a new comp. So let me just find a bit over here where it seems pretty sharp. I'm just going to do a couple seconds over here. There you go. Me making funny faces as well. I'm just going to trim it so we don't have the entire thing to do, because that'll take a while to do the stuff. So let me zoom in on the screen. So what we've got here is basically a rectangle in space. So what we would want to do is use an effect called corner pin. Let me actually show you. If I create a new solid over here, let's just do a 500 by 500 pixel solid. There is an effect under distort called corner pin. So what that does is it adds a pin to every corner, and if you drag those pins in the effect, you can reshape a layer to fit between these points. So if you wanted to, you could do this effect manually, move it over, pin every corner to the video, and then frame by frame animate these corners to match up with this thing. So you can use this to resize a video to, or an image or something, or a logo to fit on a screen. Or put a billboard on a video, replace a billboard, stuff like that. But that would be a tedious process of going through and manually doing all these. So you could do that, or you can do motion tracking. And it would be smart to do that. So I'm going to show you actually two different ways of doing this. There's the built-in After Effects way. So we're going to select our video in the source. We're going to click on Track Motion. It doesn't give you any options until you select Track Motion because it doesn't know which thing you want to do. And then under Track Type, instead of Transform, now we're going to select Corner Pin. You get a parallel corner pin, but this will only work in a scene where all these corners remain parallel, so there's no perspective in it. In this case, the phone is going to be moving around in all sorts of positions, so they're not going to be parallel lines all the time. So you would want to use perspective corner pin. If you know that the lines will stay parallel for some reason, I don't know where exactly you get that, but then you can use that. But perspective corner pin will give you a more accurate solve for a perspective situation. And you'll get 4 points that pop up in the scene, forming a little rectangle over here. So it's exactly the same as the 1 or 2 point thing. You just move your points around, setting up the corners. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. And you'll see it always forms a little rectangle between these points. Unfortunately, there is a lot of motion blur in this video because it's not filmed on the highest quality DSLR camera or something, whatever. So the shutter speed is quite slow. It's also, I think, a fairly dark room. So you would really want to make sure that you don't have that sort of stuff if you were wanting to do tracking like this. Otherwise, it's going to make your life difficult. But there we go. We've got these points set up over here. We might want to adjust the size for better solving or more accurate solving, but let's see what it does. So we just say analyze and analyze forward because we're at the start of the video. And we already see it's going wrong on most of these. It's going all over the show. So I'm just going to edit a couple of them. I'm not going to make this perfect, but it's mainly because there is this motion blur that this is not working perfectly. But if you only have to edit one, it's already a lot easier than having to edit all the 4 corner pins and animate that. So it's still a time saver than doing it manually. So let's see, the motion blur seems to have decreased at this point. So I'm going to get all 4 points right and see if we can solve forward. Yeah, so that looks okay, and then it goes wrong in the corner over there, but let's just use this section over here because I'm lazy and I don't want to do the whole thing. So I'm just going to trim it, trim it to this area. So we've got this little bit over here. It's not perfect because of motion blur, but it's now following the phone screen over there. So now I'm going to just duplicate the video over here because I'm not going to add in another image, but let's say you had a logo or some fancy screen that you want to replace your video with. So like you want to do an effect of putting in something on a computer screen or something, you can do this. So let's just put this video into this screen. So Let me just rename this so I can know this. This will be screen. So what we can do is say edit target. We've got screen selected. And then we say apply. And that will now resize with corner pin this video to fit in that space. So you would do this like if you wanted to replace video on a computer monitor, but you hadn't filmed that video yet or something like that, or the effects haven't been made for your video. And then you can just replace screens or something. To make it feel more grounded, you can turn on your motion blur as well, which might make it fit better. It's not a perfect track. You see the sort of screen is glowing around the edges there. One use case of a thing called a pre-comp. So you know how we can have a comp within a comp. Sometimes you might want to turn your existing layers into a comp. So let's say, like an example is you have a project with 100 different layers, and you've got one little sequence where you just want to simplify it. You've done the animations there and you just want to simplify your project. You can select all those layers. Well, in this case, I'm just going to select one. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say pre-compose. So that can just turn all those layers into one new comp. You get two different options over here. So one will leave all attributes. So it will just be those layers put in there. Or the other one, it'll move all the attributes. So all the effects and stuff will be put into the pre-comp. In this case, I want to do that because I've got this corner pin effect on here. So what that'll do is now we've got this layer is now moved to a new comp over here. And it's just this layer with that corner pin effect on it. If I go back to this other one, now we've got this screen as a comp in here, and I can double click and it will open it into this one. So it's a nice way to simplify your projects, and then also you can apply effects onto this, which is why I wanted to do this. There is an effect called the so under keying, there's also a matte thing over here. So remember the key light effect that I showed you when we did green screening. It creates a matte, which is sort of a mask. And if I use the matte choker on here, what it can do is adjust this motion blur alpha channel to have a different level of darkness to it. So in this case, it's not amazing, but it might just be a way to sort of extend the motion blur and things on here. You just have to adjust the different settings on here. I'm not going to fiddle with that too much, but it might be a way to solve some issues, or you can then apply other effects onto the screen as well. So the one that I did previously, it worked a little bit better. The power's back on. Great. And I did this effect, and it just sort of makes the motion blur sort of, if I turn this choker off, you can see it just sort of grounds it a little bit better in the scene. This is just an example of why you would use a pre-comp or so. The other thing I want to show you now is if you do this and the tracking is just not working very well and the motion blur is too strong or something like that, what we can do is use another thing in After Effects. I'm just going to duplicate this comp. No, this was the wrong video. This one. Okay, so here we go. We've got this same thing with the phone screen over here. there is a thing called Mocha, which is actually built into After Effects. It's actually an external program that does motion tracking, and it does often a way better job than After Effects at this sort of corner pin selection thing. So if we have our layer selected, we can go to Effects, and there's Mocha After Effects plugin over here. So we can just add that to our layer, and then we can say launch Mocha After Effects. And we can give that a little bit of a moment to just load up. And now we should have this thing showing up over here. So it gives you a whole new plugin window over here. And this is a built-in plugin, but you can get plugins that come from external things so that you can download and install. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a rectangle surface over here. So if we put over here, we've got rectangular X-spline layer. I'm not going to do a full tutorial on Mocha. I'm just going to do a simple track over here. So we've got a region over here. I'm going to put the corners on the region that we want to track. So we're tracking those corners, and it's going to search in this region. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just check the options over here. It's going to do transform, scale, rotation, skew, and I'm going to turn on perspective because that should make it a little bit more accurate. And then I'm going to say analyze forward. And then it will start calculating, and you may find that this is a lot more accurate than the built-in After Effects corner pin. You see it's actually keeping track even though there is motion blur. The corners did get a little bit offset because of the motion blur, but it is keeping it in track. It's not lost the position completely. You will get an error if it comes to a point where it decides, no, wait, I don't know what's gone on. Though we'll have to fix this because it is gone off. But let's just stop it there. So there's a little button over here to say show surface. And you'll see this little rectangle over here. The blue rectangle is what will be your replaced screen in here. So let me just move this surface, this green, blue rectangle. I'm just going to put the corners on the corner of the screen. I'm not going to do a full detailed version of this. I just want to show you that this is an alternative. So you would want to actually square out those corners. It did lose tracking a little bit, but at least some of this is okay. So what we're going to do is then we just say save the project. So this is not the After Effects project. This is the tracking project in Mocha. So save that. And then we can close this window. I'm going to do the same thing of just duplicating this layer to use as the thing we want to put in here. So this will be screen. So in the first layer, I just want to say under tracking data, I want to say create track data. So that'll take that stuff that we created and bring it in here. We just got to select layer 1 because that is where we did the tracking. And then you'll see that there are our pins for the corner, and we just say apply this to our screen. So it's doing a corner pin, and we can say corner pin with motion blur. And then we can apply that to our screen. And there we go. There's our screen moving on here. And you'll see that it's a little bit better than the After Effects version. You would still have to tweak it a little bit, and we can add motion blur and get that going on along in there. So depending on how things go and the kind of tracking you want to do, either use the built-in tracker or use the Mocha tracker. I think for the corner pin thing, this actually works way better. Okay, so that's motion tracking. A lot of it is just manual, you know, click and get your points there and then just do the analyze. What we're going to do now is not motion tracking, but camera tracking. So we were tracking objects in a scene. What we're going to do now is actually take the scene and compute where a camera is in that scene. So if I show you the example video over here, it is this. So what this is going to do is it takes video and it will, from all the stuff going on in the scene, it will try and calculate what camera was in there and what it was doing and how it was moving. And then all your things in the scene can work with that. So let me just, I want to find this thing and just create a new comp. So if you want to find a layer, the source for your layer in here, because I just wanted to find this video to create a new comp of it, I just right-clicked on it and I said reveal layer in project, so layer source in project. So this way I can just create a new comp using that same video. Okay, so here's my dog digging around in the garden. And what I want to do is get the camera from this video. So in this case, we want to select the video, and in the tracker, we want to say track camera. So what this will do is we'll just start analyzing it in the background. You don't actually have to do a lot of stuff usually. This basically looks at the video and all the little bits of points in the video with contrast and different colors and stuff. It will calculate them and do tracking on all of them. So it's doing a full scene tracking in here. So we might just have to wait a little bit of a while. In fact, this one might take a long time. It's saying it's done frame 7 of 300. Geez, this might take a while. So say this is going to take 5 minutes. So let's just do a few seconds over here. I'm going to, you'll see over here, it has got an option for shot type. So it's saying fixed angle of view. So that's if you've got a camera and you're not doing any like zoom effects and stuff, because that's the angle of view. If you've got a camera that's you're doing zoom effects, you would want to do a variable zoom track over here. But that'll be slower because it has to calculate the change in perspective as the camera zooms in. And if you know exactly what angle of view was used in your camera, you can specify it, and that can actually speed up the tracking of this video. As you can see, this can take a little bit of a while, and now it's going to try and solve based on all the points that it calculates over here. And there we go. Now it thinks it has solved this. What we can do is we can say render track points over here. So if we turn that on, we can see all these little points in the video that it has tried to calculate. So if we move along here, we'll see that all these points sort of move along and sort of stay in one spot. Sort of, it has done it pretty well, and it will throw out the data for any points that don't work. If you've got this and it seems okay, what we can do is we can just say create camera, and then we will have a camera in the scene. So we don't have any layers in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a layer in here. Camera tracking. Let's just make it a bigger layer over here so you can see it. And just make sure this is a 3D layer. And then, there you go. Now that's put it in 3D space, and we can move this text around. So let's just put it somewhere else. So it actually appears a little bit closer to the camera than I thought it was, so we can just position it in space a little bit differently. So this can also be a nice way to get natural handheld camera motion. So you can record video of camera motion, and then if you don't actually want to see the background, you can turn off your background video, and now you'll have some handheld camera motion of your 3D calculated layers in here. So we can turn on, motion blur and stuff and get some actually natural feeling motion on this stuff. So what I did in the first video over here is I actually put a ground plane in here and a light, and I turned these gray solids over here to just be materials that accept only shadows. So if I turn that to off or on, we get a gray solid layer over here with shadows cast on it. And if we turn it to accept shadows only, then we can get just shadows and try and fit those into the scene. So you might want to adjust the lights and the opacity and stuff like that, so you can get shadows that match the shadows in the scene. And this is actually quite a tricky thing to get right. You can get something fairly convincing looking for this. Trying, like overlays and different layer styles and stuff. So, yeah. Camera tracking is pretty easy. It might take a little bit of a while just to do the solving, but it's pretty cool. And there are some things you can do to improve it. Like, so if the tracking is not going correctly, you can change it to use different settings over here. It's got a thing to auto detect it, but you can say it's mostly flat. You're on a tripod and you're panning the video, stuff like that, and you can change some of these settings to improve it. But it should work most of the time just by clicking and adding it. If your video doesn't have very contrasting points and it's a very smooth background, you might want to do stuff like, if you remember from the green screen video, so if you remember from the green screen thing, I'll put the link to this place again. They've got a website where they do all the green screen videos. That's why they have all these points in the background, is so that they can do a match move using camera tracking. So then you'll have all these spots that it can analyze and get the difference of the positions as the camera moves around in the scene. So this is a bit lower res than my video, so it should go a little bit quicker. So like a green screen scene like this, you might want to add tracking points to a scene so that you can do this camera tracking. And then if you do some keying on this, then you can put this character to be into a scene with a camera. So let's create the camera. And let's add, I don't know, let's put a solid layer in here, turn this into a 3D layer. Anyway, so you can see how I've got now this ground plane over here or something, so we can put that in space. And then you could have, so I'm just going to duplicate this without the camera tracker on it. I'm just going to put a really quick green screen keying on here. I'm not going to worry about any of the details, but there you go. How you can do a match move. So that's basically match the movement of the camera and put it in a new scene. So I haven't positioned this ground plane properly, but you could have a whole 3D rendered environment that you can put a character into by doing this. and it can be really powerful. So that's camera tracking. So that is for stabilization. And there's one last thing that I want to show you now. Let me find the video. So this is where I did the effect of face tracking. So this can be really cool for applying effects onto a person's face. So in this case, I've done it just by tracking my eyes in this section over here. But you can do it, what it does is actually tracks the entire face. So if I select the layer over here, there's actually a mask around the face, and it tracks all the points on the face. So as you speak, it tracks your mouth, tracks your nose, your eyebrows, and the edge of the face. So if I actually turn on the mask, it's creating a mask around the face. So you can use this to replace someone's face. So you can have a video of one person's face and swap it with someone else's face with this, with the mask that you generate from this. Or you can apply like a fake face, so like one that you have then edited in Photoshop or something, and then you can apply it using deformations based on these tracking points. That's a way more advanced thing, but you can do that sort of pin deformation using liquify effects and stuff, using all this information in here. What I'm going to show you is just how to do this to apply just like glowing eye effect or something. So let me go back. Okay, so here's just a video of me talking. And this one is a little bit different to apply to the other tracking. You see, we don't get the option here to do face tracking. For this, you actually need to start off by creating a mask. So I'm going to select the ellipse tool. So that's under the shape tools here. And I'm just going to start off by just adding a mask around the face. You don't actually have to be this accurate. But what it does is once you have a mask selected and the tracker panel open, you'll see it automatically comes up with a face tracking panel over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set rest pose, because this is a pretty generic looking pose of the face. So I'm going to set that at this point. Analyze and track forward, and what it will do is it will start looking for all the points. So the center of the eye, the edge of the eyes, the eyebrows, and it reshapes this mask to go over the face. You've got the corners of the mouth, so you can do an effect of sort of tracking how the mouth is speaking and stuff like that. And then all those points can be used for doing other things. So you can actually do something like use yourself as an actor and then create a cartoon character and then use these points to just parent your points to your cartoon character or something. So you can make your animation a little bit easier for that sort of thing. Shaped around the edge of the face. If you don't actually want to use the mask, you can just turn the add effect for the mask to none, turning off the mask. Or if you actually do want to use this, you can use this to put it on another character's face or something like that. Ellipse, draw it over the eye, whatever. So let's just say we want to have this be some sort of effect that follows the eye. What I can do then is just, I'm going to move the anchor point on this to be the center of the circle, just so that when I move this to be on the eye, it stays on the center of the circle. And then I can, under position, I'm going to press Alt on the stopwatch and parent this to, we need to find the eye, so then on the eye pupil. And then that will get from that layer, the effect, track point, left pupil. And now this layer will follow along with the eye. So I'm just doing this with a very simple shape, but you can have this with an effect, or, you know, an actual character's eye, or, you know, maybe this is a character who's got a scar along their eye that you didn't do makeup for, but you want to do with like digital effects. You can track that along using this sort of effect. And this is a lot more accurate than doing, you know, point tracking on the face, because the face tracker actually does really good solve using facial data. So it's simple as just adding a mask, selecting it, and applying the face track. This is using face tracking with detailed features. You can just do face tracking with just the outline. So that will just do the mask of the outline of the face. The detailed features option over here gives you all the pupil and the mouth and stuff. If you just want to mask out a face, you can just do the outline only. But yeah, it's really powerful and can be really fun for applying effects to a person's face, especially for stuff like, you know, as I said, like scars or special effects and stuff like that. All right. Yeah, I hope you found this interesting and get some ideas for future projects and stuff that you can do. After Effects is actually, as you can see, really powerful with the amount of things that you can do.